Feral snarls and frenzied shouts filled the armory, the alien denobulans looking on in stunned horror as the human soldiers engaged in their savage pre-battle rituals. Lieutenant Caleb Bell pounded his armored chest, letting out a guttural roar before slamming his helmet against the skull-plated headgear of the Marine next to him. The clang of metal on metal and the heavy thud of fists striking armor plating echoed through the confined space. Caleb and his squad were aboard the GCS Perseverance, a galactic Confederacy starship hurtling through null space towards the war-ravaged Epsilon Eridani system. Intel reports flooding in painted a grim picture. The fourth planet was crawling with Kregan Empire forces, heavily dug in around a vital communications array. If the array fell, it would be a devastating blow to the Confederacy's war effort in the sector. The ship's alarms blared, red lights flashing in the armory. They were closing in on the drop zone. Caleb grabbed his AG-87 pulse rifle from the weapons rack, slamming a fresh power cell into the receiver. Grenades and extra cells went into the pouches on his combat webbing, a wicked-looking vibro knife sheathed at his side. He smeared war paint across his face in jagged, savage patterns before grabbing a chemical etching pen and adding fresh tallies to the kill markings on his armor. Dozens of hash marks denoting his confirmed kills stood out boldly. Over by the lockers, Officer Rigel and the other denobulans watched the humans warily, clearly unnerved by the violent displays and rituals. In the hangar bay, denobulan landing craft sat side by side with human dropships, gearing up for a combat launch. Major Tanner, Caleb's CO, stood before the assembled troops, his voice booming through the hangar. Listen up. What we do in the next few hours determines the fate of this whole damn sector. The Kregans know it too. They've fortified the hell out of that planet, and they'll fight like rabid dogs to hold it. But whatever those Xeno bastards throw at us, we'll throw it right back twice as hard. We stand together, we fight together, and we'll sure as hell win together. Move out. Caleb led his squad up the ramp into their dropship, mag locks, clamping his boots to the deck as the ship roared out of the hangar and into the void. The troop bay was filled with the rough chanting of the humans, psyching themselves up, an almost primal battle cant, interspersed with snarling and howling. Rigel and the other denobulans seemed to shrink back, expressions of mingled awe and fear on their faces as they gripped their restraints. The ship bucked and shuddered around them, the faint sounds of anti-aircraft fire impacting against the outer hull. The transports were punching through the outer atmosphere straight into the jaws of hell. With a bone-jarring thud, Caleb felt the ship set down. The magnetic locks disengaged and the ramps slammed down, letting in a rush of hot, sulfurous air and the sounds of battle. They charged out into the maelstrom, the humans surging down the ramp as one, weapons blazing. Plasma bolts, tracer rounds, and the searing beams of directed energy weapons lit up the ruined hellscape of the landing zone, stitching glowing lines through the smoke and haze. Caleb led the charge, a primal roar tearing from his throat as he sprinted towards the first line of Kregan gun emplacements, firing from the hip. Behind him, Rigel and the denobulans struggled to keep pace, the sights and sounds of the frenzied assault hitting them like a sledgehammer. They pushed forward, marveling at the humans' utter fearlessness in the face of overwhelming odds, even as the sheer savagery and brutality of their methods struck a chord of pure, visceral horror. The fate of the Epsilon Eridani system, and perhaps the entire sector, would be decided here amidst the blood and thunder, where humans fought with a ferocity that even the most jaded Kregan would learn to fear. Caleb's squad pushed deeper into the Kregan stronghold, a relentless force of destruction. They cleared fortified bunkers and trenches with ruthless precision, pulse rifles spitting plasma bolts and vibro blades flashing in the harsh sunlight. Rigel and the denobulans followed close behind, their own weapons adding to the onslaught. But even as they fought bravely, they couldn't match the sheer ferocity and aggression of the human soldiers. A monstrous Kregan war machine lumbered into view, its armored hide dripping with weapons. It belched gouts of plasma, scouring the battlefield and reducing everything in its path to molten slag. Caleb barked orders to his squad, directing their fire onto the machine's weak points. Grenades arced through the air, exploding against the behemoth's armor in showers of shrapnel and fire. Rigel and his fellow Denobulans dove for cover, staring in disbelief as the humans stood their ground, pouring fire into the metal monstrosity. They couldn't comprehend the sheer guts it took to face such a terrifying foe head-on. Caleb seemed to dance through the chaos, his movements fluid and purposeful. With a feral grin, he launched himself at the war machine, scrambling up its armor-plated sides like a monkey scaling a tree. He slapped a bundle of explosives onto a vulnerable joint and leapt clear, hitting the ground in a combat roll as the machine vanished in a thunderous explosion. As the smoke cleared, Rigel gaped at the smoldering wreckage, then at Caleb. The human's armor was scorched and pitted, but somehow unbreached. Caleb just flashed a predatory smile and motioned for the squad to press on. The humans surged forward, driving the Kriegans back with relentless aggression. They hurled taunts and obscenities at the aliens, goading them into reckless charges that were brutally cut down by precise bursts of plasma fire. Rigel winced at the sheer savagery of it. The way the humans wielded insults like weapons, shattering the enemy's morale and discipline. As they neared the comm array, the Kriegans rallied for a final, desperate stand. Waves of fanatical troops threw themselves at the human lines, heedless of the withering fire that scythed through their ranks. Caleb and his squad met them head-on, pulse rifles crackling, and combat knives flashing as they engaged in brutal close-quarters fighting. The air was filled with the brutal staccato of gunfire, the meaty smack of armored fists on flesh, and the agonized shrieks of dying Kriegans. Through the swirling melee, Caleb caught sight of a massive Kriegan commander, the alien gesturing and snarling as it directed the defense. With a feral grin, Caleb drew his bayonet, the wickedly sharp blade snapping into place on his rifle's muzzle. Bellowing a wordless war cry, he charged straight at the Kriegan leader, hurtling fallen bodies and blasted rubble. The two titans clashed in a whirlwind of violence, human strength and fury matched against alien ferocity and cunning. Rigel and the other Denobulans could only watch in horrified fascination as the two warriors dueled, Caleb's bayonet glinting and flashing as it parried the Kriegan's crackling energy glaive. In a blur of motion, Caleb slipped inside the alien's guard and rammed the bayonet up under its chin, the razor-sharp point punching through the Kriegan's skull. Wrenching his gore-soaked blade free, Caleb raised the dripping trophy overhead, unleashing a primal roar of triumph. His Marines, electrified by the sight, surged forward with renewed ferocity, Rigel and the shell-shocked Denobulans numbly stumbling in their wake. The humans crashed into the reeling Kriegan lines like a tidal wave, an inexorable force of nature. The Kriegan defenses crumbled like sand before the human onslaught. Caleb's squad blasted their way into the comm array, unleashing a whirlwind of precise destruction as they neutralized the remaining defenders and seized control of the vital systems. Rigel could only marvel at the speed and skill with which they operated, even as the ruthless savagery of their methods chilled him to the bone. As the last shots faded away, the humans erupted in raucous cheers and whoops of victory. They clustered together, comparing battle scars and kill counts, laughing and jostling one another as they smeared alien blood across their armor like war paint. The Denobulans kept a wary distance, trying to process the sheer scope of the violence they had witnessed. Caleb swaggered over to Rigel, clapping the Denobulan on the shoulder with a gore-streaked gauntlet. "Not bad for a first time out, Riggs." He laughed, his grin fierce and predatory. "You showed some real steel out there. Keep it up and you'll make one hell of a soldier." Rigel could only nod mutely, his mind turning as he struggled to come to grips with the unsettling truths that had been laid bare. The humans were allies, yes, but also something more, something primal and terrifying. They were warriors of almost mythical prowess, reveling in the savagery of battle with a ferocity that defied comprehension. As he looked out over the scorched and blasted hellscape of the battlefield, Rigel knew that his perceptions had been forever altered. The Kriegan threat had been met and bested, but at a cost that would haunt the minds of the Denobulans for a long time to come. The true face of war, in all its visceral horror and primal glory, had been indelibly seared into their consciousness. The acrid stench of scorched earth and spent plasma charges hung heavy in the air, as the joint human-denobulan force trudged back to their hastily erected base camp. Rigel's muscles ached with each step, his uniform caked with alien blood and grime. All around him, soldiers tended to their wounds and gear with practiced efficiency. Rigel's gaze fell upon Caleb and his squad, huddled together near a makeshift fire pit. Their raucous laughter cut through the evening air, a stark contrast to the somber mood among the denobulan troops. "So there I was, face to face with this ugly bastard," one of the humans exclaimed, gesturing wildly. "I swear its breath could have melted Durasteel, but I just grinned and said, 'Smile for the family photo, asshole,' before I put a bolt right between its eyes." The humans erupted in laughter, slapping each other on the back as they swapped more gruesome tales. Rigel watched, stomach churning, as they lovingly cleaned their weapons. The barrels of their pulse rifles gleamed in the firelight as practiced hands wiped away every speck of dirt and gore. "Check it out," Caleb said, holding up his armored forearm. Fresh tally marks stood out against the scratched metal. 23 confirmed kills today. Not bad for a milk run, eh? The other humans whistled appreciatively, comparing their own tallies with a mix of pride and good-natured ribbing. Rigel felt a chill run down his spine, unable to reconcile their jovial mood with the day's carnage. Steeling himself, Rigel approached the group. "Lieutenant Bell," he said, his voice wavering slightly, "how can you all be so calm after what we just went through?" Caleb looked up, his grin fading slightly as he took in Rigel's troubled expression. "It's how we cope, Riggs," he said with a shrug. "Gotta celebrate the wins, you know? Otherwise the nightmares will eat you alive." Rigel pressed further, his voice barely above a whisper. "But don't you feel any remorse? Any sorrow for the lives we took today?" The human was quiet for a long moment, his eyes growing distant. When he spoke, his voice was low and measured. "Course we do, Riggs, but we grieve in our own way, in our own time. Out there, in the thick of it, you can't hesitate, can't doubt. Gotta commit 100%, or you're dead." Rigel nodded slowly, struggling to process this alien mindset. As he watched the humans return to their banter, a persistence crystallized within him. If he was to survive in this new reality of constant warfare, he needed to understand these terrifying yet effective warriors. Over the next few days, Rigel approached Caleb during their downtime. After much cajoling and promises of cultural exchange, the human agreed to share some of their combat traditions. As the sun set on their fourth night in camp, Caleb led Rigel to a secluded clearing. "All right, Riggs," he said, his voice uncharacteristically serious. "We'll start with some basic focus exercises. Clear your mind of everything but the sound of my voice." Rigel closed his eyes, listening intently as Caleb began a low, rhythmic chant. The guttural sounds seemed to bypass his conscious mind, stirring something primal deep within. His heartbeat quickened, breath coming in short gasps as Caleb's voice painted vivid images of battle in his mind's eye. Night after night, they continued these sessions. Caleb taught him visualization techniques to channel fear into aggression, breathing exercises to steady his aim in the heat of combat. At first, Rigel recoiled from these methods, feeling as though they stripped away his very identity. But as the days wore on, something began to change. Rigel felt a spark ignite within him, a wellspring of intensity he never knew existed. The peaceful denobulan found himself tapping into reserves of strength and focus that both thrilled and terrified him. Their time at the camp drew to a close as new orders came through. The joint force was to push deeper into Kregan territory, striking at the heart of their defensive lines. As they geared up for the assault, Rigel found himself drawn to Caleb and his squad. Without a word, Caleb handed him a small etching tool. Rigel stared at it for a long moment before raising it to his chest plate. With trembling hands, he carved a single, short line into the metal, his first tally mark. Caleb nodded approvingly, then raised his voice in a primal roar. The other humans joined in, pounding their chests and howling their defiance to the alien skies. And there, amidst the cacophony of impending violence, Rigel threw back his head and added his voice to the chorus. Chorus. The transports rumbled through the upper atmosphere, their hulls glowing cherry red from the friction. Inside, Caleb glanced over at Rigel, eyebrows raised in surprise. The denobulan's face was a mask of focus as he meticulously applied dark stripes of war paint across his cheeks and forehead. And Rigel caught Caleb's eye and grinned, baring teeth stained red from the stimulant-laced battlegum human soldiers favored. With practiced motions, he etched another tally mark into his chest plate, the scrape of metal on metal lost in the roar of the engines. "Looking good, Riggs," Caleb shouted over the din. "You ready to kick some Cregan ass?" Rigel's response was a guttural roar that sent chills down the spines of even the most hardened human veterans. The transport bucked as it hit the ground, rear hatch slamming open to reveal a hellscape of trenches and fortifications. "For Earth and Denobula," Caleb bellowed, charging out into the maelstrom with Rigel hot on his heels. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air as Cregan emplacements opened fire. Caleb and Rigel moved like twin typhoons of destruction, their weapons spitting death with unerring accuracy. A Cregan soldier popped up from a trench, mandibles clicking in alarm. Rigel's vibro knife flashed, separating the alien's head from its shoulders in a spray of ichor. "Nice one," Caleb laughed, blasting a hole through another Cregan's chest. "But watch this." He vaulted over a low wall, landing boots first on a hulking alien. As it toppled, Caleb jammed his rifle into its mouth and pulled the trigger, reducing its head to a smoking ruin. A deafening mechanical roar drowned out the sounds of battle. A massive Cregan war machine lumbered into view, its weapons already tracking targets. Rigel froze, eyes wide as cannon blasts reduced entire squads to bloody mist. But Caleb was already moving. He sprinted towards the metal monstrosity, zigzagging to avoid the streams of plasma fire that scorched the earth around him. With inhuman grace, he leapt onto one of the walker's legs, slapping breaching charges onto vital joints as he climbed. Rigel watched in awe as Caleb reached the main body, planting the last of his explosives before kicking off in a backflip that carried him clear of the blast radius. The charges detonated in a chain reaction, crippling the war machine's legs and sending it crashing to the ground. Something primal awoke in Rigel. With a feral howl, he sprinted towards the fallen behemoth, pulling plasma grenades from his belt. He hurled them in a graceful arc, the explosives detonating against weakened armor plates. Caleb landed beside him, flashing a predatory grin. "Now we finish it," he roared. Together they scaled the smoking wreckage, Rigel providing covering fire as Caleb made for the central core. The human jammed his rifle into a gap in the armor and emptied his entire magazine. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the war machine's chassis buckled, internal explosions tearing it apart from within. Caleb grabbed Rigel and leapt, the fireball chasing them as they hit the ground and rolled to safety. As the smoke cleared, Rigel stood transfixed. His armor was scorched and pitted, alien blood forming abstract patterns across its surface. He felt Caleb's hand clasp his shoulder. "Welcome to the Brotherhood," the human said, his voice thick with pride. Something snapped inside Rigel. A lifetime of restraint and civility burned away, replaced by a savage joy he'd never known. He threw back his head and roared, the sound carrying across the battlefield and striking fear into the hearts of the remaining Cregan defenders. What followed was a slaughter. Rigel matched Caleb blow for blow, reveling in the carnage. Where once he would have balked at such brutality, now he embraced it. He waded into clusters of enemies, vibroblade singing as it parted flesh from bone. "Come on, you ugly bastards," he bellowed, voice raw from screaming. "Is this the best you can do?" The Cregan lines crumbled before the onslaught. Rigel lost himself in a haze of violence, dimly aware of Caleb fighting at his side as they carved a bloody path to the depot's central compound. By the time they breached the final defenses, Rigel's arms ached from the constant slaughter. As the last shots faded, replaced by the cheers of victorious human troops, Rigel found himself swept up in their savage celebration. Without thinking, he knelt beside the corpse of a massive Kriegan elite. His vibroblade made short work of sinew and bone as he separated its horned skull from the body. Rigel stood, hefting his grisly trophy overhead. The primal scream that tore from his throat was barely recognizable as his own voice. All around him, human soldiers howled their approval, firing weapons into the air and desecrating fallen enemies. He felt Caleb's arm wrap around his shoulders. The human's face split in a fierce grin of approval. In that moment, steeped in blood and victory, Rigel knew he had found his true calling. The peaceful Denobulan was gone, reforged in the crucible of battle into something altogether more. The weeks following the supply depot battle blurred into a relentless assault on Kriegan territory. Rigel's transformation accelerated with each engagement, his once gentle nature consumed by an insatiable appetite for violence. During a rare lull in combat, Caleb found Rigel in the communal showers. The Denobulan stood naked, razor blade in hand, meticulously carving precise lines into his blue-tinged flesh. "Jesus, Riggs," Caleb breathed. "What are you doing?" Rigel's eyes gleamed with manic intensity. "Keeping count," he said, voice unnaturally calm as blood trickled down his chest. "Can't let a single kill go unrecorded." Caleb watched, stomach churning, as Rigel finished etching the grisly tally. The Denobulan's skin was a canvas of scars, each mark a perversion of his people's reverence for the sanctity of life. Later, Caleb visited Rigel's quarters, recoiling at the nightmarish displays adorning every surface. Severed Kriegan limbs hung from hooks, their exoskeletons polished to a sickening sheen. A macabre mobile dangled from the ceiling, constructed from alien bone fragments and strips of leathery hide. Rigel cackled, gesturing proudly at his handiwork. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he asked, running fingers lovingly over a grotesque sculpture of fused Kriegan parts. "I call this one Entropy's Embrace." On patrol, Rigel's newfound cruelty manifested in ever more disturbing ways. He taunted cowering Kriegan civilians, his sing-song voice carrying promises of torment. When they engaged enemy combatants, Rigel fought with savage glee, prolonging kills for maximum suffering. After one particularly brutal skirmish, Caleb found Rigel desecrating enemy corpses, arranging them in obscene positions and scrawling cryptic symbols with their viscera. The human soldiers looked on, a mix of revulsion and grudging respect in their eyes. "Damn, Bell," Private Rodriguez muttered. "What the hell did you do to that Denobulan?" Caleb had no answer, watching as Rigel danced among the dead, laughing maniacally. As they prepared for the final push to the Kriegan homeworld, Rigel's madness reached fever pitch. In the armory, Caleb stumbled upon a chilling scene. Rigel knelt shirtless on the floor, surrounded by shards of alien bone. The Denobulan chanted in a guttural language, slicing intricate patterns into his arms and chest. "Rigel, stop!" Caleb shouted, moving to intervene. Rigel's head snapped up, eyes unfocused and feral. "The bones speak, Caleb," he hissed. "They demand blood, so much blood." On the dropship, Rigel's frenzy infected the entire squad. He shrieked and howled, slamming his head against the bulkhead until crimson streaked his face. The humans joined in, pounding their chests and chanting in a language Caleb didn't recognize. As they hit the ground, Rigel exploded from the transport like a demon unleashed. He charged headlong into Kriegan defenses, ignoring his rifle in favor of wickedly curved blades. Caleb watched in horror as Rigel eviscerated aliens with his bare hands, pausing only to smear entrails across his face and body. "Come on, you chitinous fucks!" Rigel screamed, voice raw and inhuman. "I'll wear your shells as a crown." Even hardened veterans blanched at the Denobulan's brutality. Rigel waded through Kriegan ranks, cackling as he tore limbs from sockets and crushed alien skulls beneath his boots. Near the battle's end, Caleb limped through the wreckage of a Kriegan outpost, nursing a plasma burn on his leg. A keening wail drew him to a half-collapsed structure. Inside, he found a nightmare made flesh. Rigel loomed over a group of Kriegan prisoners, their chitinous bodies quivering in terror. The Denobulan's skin was a latticework of fresh cuts and alien blood, crude symbols gouged into every available surface. "Witness the truth of existence," Rigel intoned, voice distant and dreamy. He lifted a jagged shard of metal, its edge wickedly sharp. "In pain, we find transcendence." Caleb watched, paralyzed, as Rigel began his grotesque ritual. The Denobulan's movements were practiced, almost reverent, as he inflicted increasingly inventive torments on his captives. Their screams blended with Rigel's ecstatic cries, a hellish chorus that seemed to make the very air shudder. When only one prisoner remained, Rigel turned to Caleb. His eyes were black pits, reflecting nothing but madness and an inferno of rage. "Join me, brother," Rigel said, extending a blood-soaked hand. "Let us complete the work you began." Caleb stumbled backward, bile rising in his throat. What had he done? What monster had he created in his quest for the perfect warrior? Rigel shrugged, turning back to his victim. With practiced ease, he slit the Kregan's throat, using its spilled lifeblood to paint the final sigils on his flesh. As the alien gave a last rattling gasp, Rigel threw his head back and howled in triumph. In that moment, staring into the abyss of Rigel's fractured psyche, Caleb knew a truth that would haunt him long after the war's end. He had unleashed something far worse than any enemy they faced, a force of pure, unrestrained savagery that might never be contained again.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.